Welcome to the Fantasy Football Brothers podcast. My name is Blake, and I'm here with my younger brother Carson, and we are on to Week 3. We're going to be discussing this week's matchups, and Carson, let's go ahead and get you introduced to the people.
All right, it's Carson. You all know me. Blake basically tabulated our predictions of the first 2 weeks, and I have a 2-point lead. I'm 19-13, whereas Blake is 17 and 15. It is funny though, like it seems like the median would probably be right at 50% of correct predictions for match outcomes. So that is interesting. It does show that it can be a toss-up in a lot of cases.
It's certainly, and I think we're not always picking with the favorite. And I think that showed when you went with the Cardinals last week.
We'll talk about that later, yeah.
Well, yeah, but just to get that out of the way, that's why you got another game edge on me, because otherwise we picked exactly the same last week. And it was looking like I was going to be right on that call, and then the Raiders blew it. Sorry, Raiders fans, but go Pats. Let's go ahead and get into this.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start with Thursday Night Football, which will be the Steelers at the Browns divisional matchup. So, as it currently stands, this is a bad offense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Najee and Deontay both have pretty safe floors still, but you're somewhat disappointed so far if you've drafted them. I feel like especially Najee, because if you spent a first-round pick on him and he's kind of done barely double digits, I mean, there's still plenty of time in the season, and you're not benching him, but it is still disappointing. Same reason why I kind of avoided Deontay, is usually a guy I go after, but I was skeptical of this offense. So do you think this is kind of predictable for what's happening?
Well, so I'll say this. I think outside of a very short, very, very short list, there's been a lot of first-round running backs that have underperformed thus far.
That's true.
So I would say don't panic on Najee Harris. I think he is still a very valuable pass-catching option out of the backfield. We've seen it from him last season as a rookie. I think, he's going to get right. This offense is going to figure itself out, whether it's under Kenny Pickett or anyone else for that matter. But I wouldn't panic on him. And similarly with Deontay Johnson, I think you kind of knew what you were expecting when you drafted him. He's a double-digit guy most weeks, high target share in the offense. And, I mean, in one league I have him as my wide receiver 3. So not necessarily something that no, he is my wide receiver 2 in that league. But
still, though,
yeah. Regardless, I think he's safe in not going to necessarily boom in this offense right now, but he has great upside. And again, I wouldn't be worried about him either. Go ahead and continue with what you were going with.
Yeah, so the only fringe starter, I guess, on your roster that's worth talking about is Pat Freiermuth. He had 12.2 fantasy points last week, 4 receptions on 7 targets, and a touchdown on 22 yards. That's back-to-back double-digit fantasy scores for Freiermuth. He's 88% rostered, so you probably won't get him off the waivers, but only 59% of people are starting him. So would you say he's worth starting going forward if you're kind of streaming options?
Yeah, probably. I mean, tight end is such a difficult spot. It's pretty much like flavor of the week if you don't have one of those top-end guys. So from that perspective, given the matchup, I expect Pittsburgh to have to throw the ball a little bit. Yeah. And Freiermuth is one of those guys that does get targeted in the red zone especially. And I think that's kind of where his upside relies upon.
I can go ahead and talk about targets, which I think is what keeps him a little bit safe in this offense. Deontay, of course, is leading the way across the first 2 games with 22 targets, so that's what keeps his floor high. But Freiermuth has 17 targets, and third behind him is Claypool at 12, so that's not great, and then Najee is 8. I think that keeps him reliable. If he's on the waivers for whatever reason, if you're in those 12% of leagues in sleeper, because these are sleeper percentages, get him.
Yeah.
Probably worth starting unless you have one of the top guys.
Yeah, if he's unrostered in your league, you're probably playing in a 6-team league or an 8-team league. It's probably really a small league. So, yeah. But either way, I like your analysis in terms of the target share. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the reason why I was saying don't worry about Deontay. I mean, 22 targets, that's 11 targets per week. Yeah. And with Najee Harris, I mean, even 4 targets from a running back isn't ideal, but it's still, I would say, better than
his floor.
Better than most in a PPR setting. So, and I think that number could go up, especially with the quarterback change, which I think is only a matter of time.
For sure. So we'll talk about the Browns next. I know you have Nick Chubb and both Kareem Hunt, so maybe air to your analysis in a second here. But Nick Chubb boomed in week 2 due to touchdowns. I believe he actually had more rushing yards in week 1, but got no touchdowns. And then Kareem Hunt boomed in week 1 due to touchdowns and didn't do amazing in week 2. So do you feel like they're both kind of touchdown dependent? I mean, you're starting Chubb no matter what. That's a given. But Hunt becomes a little bit more fringe with the fact that he might not get a touchdown. Would you agree?
Sort of. So I think that Kareem Hunt, I'm going to pull up his stats real quick.
Something that's to be said also is that since he does get a lot more of the receiving work when compared to Chubb, that does keep his floor high enough to probably be a safe flex for you. So I will say that at least.
Yeah, so like him only getting 2 targets last week, I think
Yeah.
is definitely abnormal.
Yes.
He got 4 targets in week 1 and ended up capitalizing on a touchdown for one of those catches. But I would say that, you're right. Kareem Hunt is kind of a fringe starter, but it seems like at least 50% of the time he works every time.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a guy in this offense that, especially with the limited upside in the pass catching department, Kareem Hunt does get on the field for about 50% of the snaps, and he's usually a very effective runner. Through the first 2 weeks, he has been averaging over 4 yards a carry, and he's getting, low double-digit carries, and then with that, 4 to 3 to 4 targets per week minimum. I know he just got 2 last week, but I think that was more of an like I said, more of an anomaly than the norm.
Yeah, agreed.
I think that Kareem Hunt has that upside to be a fringe flex play if you need him. Now, this week in particular, considering the game that he's coming off of, I'm less inclined to put him in my flex spot.
Yeah.
But I still think that he has the upside of a top 25 back. I mean, we talked about this in our running backs ranking video during the preseason. I really like Kareem Hunt, and I think if he ends up on a different team, he enters into an RB1 conversation. So
he certainly has
the talent is there. Yeah, the talent is there. The opportunity is limited, but in PPR scoring, it's more enticing. Just this week in particular, especially on a short week, I'm going to avoid flexing him if I can.
Yeah. All right, I agree with all of that. So more of the pass catchers on the Browns, though. So I kind of highlighted Donovan Peoples-Jones last week because I think he had 11 targets, but this week he had 1 target and 0 catches, so much for that. He's going to have to put up the work again to make him relevant, so he's not anymore at the moment. But Amari Cooper did well, 25.1 fantasy points, 9 receptions on 10 targets, and a receiving touchdown on 101 receiving yards. So does Cooper safely make starting lineups going forward? I mean, he's probably your wide receiver 2, maybe more likely probably your wide receiver 3. So do you think he makes lineups going forward?
Yeah, so based on where he was drafted, I would agree with you. He's probably like your 3rd option.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It depends on who you got. I mean, there's plenty of guys that went later in drafts and have kind of emerged, like Drake London and Gabriel Davis. And I think that those guys, for instance, you would be starting ahead of Amari Cooper if you also rostered them. Yeah. So it's a consideration. I don't think he's a lineup lock. I don't think he's a wide receiver 2 at this point, despite the production that we saw in week 2. But I would say that, more often than not, this is kind of what we expect from Amari Cooper. He's a boom-bust kind of guy. Yeah. And with inconsistent quarterback play and a heavily featured running back-focused offense, it's hard to advocate for Cooper week in and week out being in your lineup.
Yeah, not a super flashy play, but it is definitely reassuring to see him put up this performance with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, just so you know that he can do it. So that is reassuring. I'm going to go ahead and pick the Browns for this one to win the game. I think that neither of these offenses are super exciting, but I think their defenses are both pretty good, but I still would think that Nick Chubb and Hunt is what puts them over ahead of the Steelers for me. And you agree?
Yeah, I think I'm going to join you on this one. They should have won last week against the Jets if, obviously their defense was horrendous, but if Nick Chubb just didn't go into the end zone that last time, there would be no opportunity for a miraculous comeback for the Jets, and so I think they're going to get it done. The Steelers, again, lacking TJ Watt, that pass rush is going to be a little bit worse, as we saw in the previous week, and I think that, that Cleveland's going to bounce back at home.
Yeah, agreed. All right, we'll move on to Sunday at noon. We have the Bills at the Dolphins. This should be an exciting divisional matchup again. But for the Bills and Monday Night Football, or just Monday I don't remember if it was the night game or not, but on Monday they played, and it was the Allen and the Diggs show. It just really was.
It was
Josh
the early
Allen
Monday game. Yeah.
Yeah, Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, amazing. Let me just analyze the game. So even in Gabriel Davis's absence, which keep an eye on him because he had an ankle injury which kept him out of this game. So even his absence, no other wide receiver on the Bills saw more than 3 targets besides Diggs. So it was really, as I said, the Allen and Diggs show. Allen, adding an S to him because I'm saying them together. Allen was really looking for Diggs throughout the entire game. I'm seeing a clip of Diggs on the sideline saying, I'm him, and I like it because, I've been a little bit higher on Diggs than a lot of people, but, I mean, he still was a undisputed wide receiver 1 going into the season. But yeah, good to see that. And then not a whole lot to say in the rushing department because they killed the Titans passing the ball. So much so that James Cook led the Bills' backfield in touches, but most of that came in garbage time when it was basically just the backups playing each other in the fourth quarter. But I guess I'll focus on Devin Singletary because he's probably the only person that you are ever potentially starting or thinking about starting, and he only got 4.1 fantasy points in this game, 6 rushes for 19 yards, 2 receptions on 4 targets for 2 yards, played 54% of snaps, but again, that's not super representative because of how the game ended. But what do you do if you roster Singletary?
Bench him.
I agree. I think that
you put him on your bench because the Bills don't need to run the ball in order to win games.
It's going to be Allen and Diggs, and then if that doesn't work, it's going to be Davis, and if that doesn't work, I would almost say it's Knox before it's any of the running backs. Like, they have so many options.
It's probably Josh Allen with his legs before it's a running back.
That's true.
Honestly.
So I agree. I think that James Cook is probably the best upside at where you drafted him because of the fact that he's a rookie and could get some pass catching, but again, you're not liking any of these guys super much.
No. I'm not interested in rostering any Bills running backs at this stage in the season. And if I do, like you said, I'm putting them on my bench and leaving them there until they prove otherwise, until they prove me wrong, because at the stage in the draft that you likely got Devin Singletary, he's not your RB2, and so you really shouldn't have to worry about the situation.
Yeah.
But if you do find yourself in that situation, hopefully you've used the waivers correctly or you've negotiated a trade in order to fill that RB2 slot, because Devin Singletary nor James Cook are the solution.
Yeah. Or Zach Moss, for that matter.
Right.
Move on to the Dolphins, which... Wow, what a game. 28 points in the fourth quarter, I believe, for the Dolphins to come back and win against the Ravens, so that was crazy. So Tua, in 4-point passing TD scoring, scored 38.86 fantasy points. I mean, he threw for 469 yards and 6 passing touchdowns. That's just insane, and it goes without saying that Hill and Waddle both boomed too. Tua's rostered in 65% of leagues, so it's not super likely that he's on your waivers, but if he is, definitely pick him up. But basically all of this is to say that I don't see him doing amazing against the Bills. I think you should roster him if he somehow isn't in your league, but I think it's going to be a wake-up call against the Bills. I mean, they face a Ravens team in week 2 that has now faced 109 passing attempts against Flacco and Tua, so every team's throwing against them so far, but... Do you agree that the Bills' defense is going to be a wake-up call for this offense?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, we were talking earlier before we started recording, but Buffalo looks like the bully of the NFL right now.
Yeah,
and
I think they are the best team as it looks right now.
Yeah, and I don't think that, obviously coming off of a hot game in Baltimore, Miami's now going to come home and probably going to get punched in the mouth by Josh Allen and this high-powered offense, but not only that, just a stifling defense. I think it's going to be, like you said, a wake-up call for this team. I'm not benching Waddle. I'm not benching Hill. I'm keeping those guys in, but I'm also not turning around and potentially benching my current starting QB for Tua because of the week that he had last week. You have to start those wide receivers. I think there's better options elsewhere at quarterback.
Yeah, and let's talk about this backfield because maybe if the passing's not working, we can do a little bit better in the backfield, but not looking too good.
No,
I mean, Chase Edmonds, we said potential buy low candidate last week, but he only had 5.1 fantasy points, and most of that came from a pretty big run near the end of the game. I mean, he had 6 touches, 51% of snaps. Meanwhile, good old Raheem Mostert hasn't gotten injured yet, and he's got 10.9 fantasy points from this game on 55% of snaps, so slightly more snaps than Edmonds, and he had 14 touches. I I picked up Mostert because I have Edmonds. Maybe wait and see, but do they kind of negate each other's fantasy value?
So definitely wait and see. I don't think you need
Yeah.
to start Raheem Mostert against the Bills this week.
Yeah.
And if you
Hopefully
roster
not.
Chase Edmonds, you're in a tough spot because I don't necessarily think they negate each other because I think really they're taking on two different roles in
Sure.
this offense. But as long as Mostert remains healthy, I think Chase Edmonds' value overall is diminished. And that's the problem. So if you're really kind of in a position where if you're buying low, what is the manager realistically going to accept?
Yeah.
And what are you willing to part ways with for someone who's now suddenly all found himself in a committee
Yeah,
in an
he's
offense
not,
that doesn't
he's not
that doesn't
appealing.
have to they don't have to run to be successful. So
Yeah,
it seems like the upside is shrinking.
Yeah, he's not an appealing draft or trade target like he was last week. I mean, things could change, of course, but right now it's not looking nearly as appealing. You made the comparison when we weren't recording that this Dolphins offense is kind of like a light version of this Bills offense as far as just wanting to pass the ball and not get that backfield involved, at least fantasy
Well,
wise.
yeah, all the talent
Yeah.
talent is in the receiving core, and so if you don't have to run the ball to win, you
Yeah.
won't.
Yeah. And I don't think they're going to win. We both think the Bills are going to win this. So
Yeah,
as we've
picking
kinda,
the Bills
That's not
on the
surprising.
road. I'm just to kind of give you some insight looking forward. I'm picking the Bills to win every game up until potentially week 6, where they play the Chiefs.
Wow. All right.
I don't think that's that bold, to be honest.
No,
but
it's not. But
I just wanted to get that out there.
yeah, I think that's fair, and I'm sure I'll join you in that, and maybe even in that week 6. But we'll see as we get closer. All right, we'll move on to the next game we'll talk about, which is Bengals at the Jets. Wow, one team between these two teams, and it's not the Bengals. 0-2 for the Bengals so far, the Super Bowl losers of last season. So I'm really not going to talk to too many people. If you have Burrow, you're still starting him. If you have Mixon, you're starting him. If you have Chase, you're starting him. If Higgins, you're starting him. That doesn't change. But
Yeah.
the only person I think that has emerged quietly, because they haven't done great the first 2 games of the season, but is Hayden Hurst. 7.4 fantasy points, 5 receptions on 7 targets for 24 yards. He's only 27% rostered, and he had the same snap percentage as Tyler Boyd this last week, if that's any frame of reference for how much he's playing in this offense. But would you agree that Hurst is worth going after and picking up off the waivers if he's there?
Yeah, potentially. It depends on who you have, depends on what you need.
Yeah.
I think he's kind of a low-end candidate for a double-digit week. But, if you have Dalton Schultz and you're in need of someone who could potentially replace him for this week while he's dealing with his injury, Hayden Hurst would be someone I would look to, especially with that rostership percentage.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really just comes down to, if this game ends up being, a lot of passing volume on both sides, then Hayden Hurst is going to get some looks, as we've seen from him already.
Yeah.
And, maybe he falls in the end zone and makes your week. But, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and I mentioned him last week, I'm pretty sure, because he is getting targets. So I think that if the Bengals have a big offensive performance this week, and people might start paying attention to him. So if you want to go for it, maybe do it now while people aren't really looking at him because they're distracted at the losing streak of the Bengals. But yeah, that's all I'll talk about the Bengals specifically. So let's talk about the Jets. Garrett Wilson. It's got to be like rookie performance of the week, offensive rookie performance of the week. He had 30 fantasy points, 8 receptions on 14 targets and 2 receiving touchdowns, and 102 yards, and a rush for -2 yards. But how much longer? I mean, the real thing is, like, everyone expected Elijah Moore to be doing a little bit better and not for it to be the Garrett Wilson show. So I guess I'll just ask you, what's your confidence level and how much do you trust Wilson to potentially be in your starting lineup?
So I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, and I just want to say quickly that I think, ADP was presenting a different story than what we were seeing in the real world because of how early Garrett Wilson was drafted in the real NFL.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he was the 10th overall pick, and that kind of early first round pedigree for wide receivers has a real track record for success early in the NFL. And So from that perspective, I think the ADP was kind of misleading us. I'm not surprised that Garrett Wilson is emerging as he is.
Yeah.
And in terms of confidence for him, in a 12-team league, I'm starting him as my flex.
Yeah.
And I feel okay about it. I mean, I also have Chris Godwin on my bench in that league, but
Yeah.
Given the size of your league, I think Garrett Wilson is a viable flex, especially with what we've seen, and maybe he works his way into your lineup and becomes a great sell high candidate, or someone, if he's really legit season long, then he could be a league winner.
Agreed. I think a lot of people might be being too picky if they feel like they need to bench him this week because they probably don't have the depth to have a much safer option or want to go a different route. But
right.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, I think his ADP was lower because of Zach Wilson potentially, but now that Flacco's been at QB, it seems to be a little bit more reliable. Which is also, I think, when Elijah Moore boomed the most last season was whenever Joe Flacco was playing. So we'll see what happens.
Well, and Mike White and anyone else.
anyone besides Zach Wilson. But we'll talk about this. We'll talk about this as they get closer to the return of Zach Wilson. But it's inevitable no matter what Flacco does, right? I mean, just because of the age of the two players, they can't just say it's Flacco season, baby. We're the Jets. We're going for the Super Bowl, because they're not.
Right. No, I know. It's a tough position they found themselves in because it seems like they drafted the wrong guy. Yeah. And it's just every time he's off the field and the Jets are performing better when he's not there, it's a very bad look. Yeah. I'm hoping that he's studying film and, not pulling a Kyler, just trying to improve off the field.
Or whatever the other extracurricular activities he engages into with mother's friends or whatever that may have been. Oh my gosh, he seems like quite the character. Right. All right, let's talk about the people that are on the field, though. So Tyler Conklin had 10 fantasy points, 6 receptions on 9 targets for 40 yards, played 100% of snaps, which I feel like you don't see that a lot. He was really in there. But back-to-back weeks quietly with double-digit fantasy scores, although a touchdown aided that for him in week 1. 7% rostered. Is Conklin a sneaky waiver acquisition at tight end?
I would say yes. He's another good candidate for a Dalton Schultz replacement. That same 12-team league that I'm flexing Garrett Wilson, I've picked up Conklin to replace Dalton Schultz for this week. I think that, so we have to keep in mind that CJ Uzomah has not been healthy, but it seems like even still, Conklin has, he had some success with Minnesota last season, and I think that that's going to emerge, and I don't think even if Uzomah is healthy that it really cuts into that usage too much because, ultimately it's about what you're doing on the field that matters, and it's not the same situation as Flacco versus Zach Wilson. It's whoever's producing, regardless of age in this scenario, it's going to be the guy that's doing well. So I think Conklin's a safe play this week.
All right, I like that too. All right, so Michael Carter. Let's talk about the backfield a little bit. Michael Carter had 12 touches, while Breece Hall had 8 touches and a touchdown, which helped him. Hall has scraped out back-to-back double-digit fantasy scores, but that may not happen again against this Bengals team that desperately needs a win. I mean, I feel like a lot of people drafted Breece Hall as their RB2 potentially in hopes that Michael Carter wouldn't be as involved, but it's not looking like that right away. And Breece Hall's very lucky to have gotten a touchdown this past week. I feel like the narrative would be even worse on him if he didn't have that touchdown. I think on his only reception, and he got a touchdown out of it. But, I mean, you probably aren't in a position to bench him unless one of your unexpected running backs is doing better.
Yeah, I mean, like I said last week, I wasn't really comfortable flexing anyone on the team other than the running backs, and fortunately, it somewhat paid off last week with Breece Hall's touchdown, like you mentioned. Yeah. Now Garrett Wilson has emerged, and Tyler Conklin's a different category, being a tight end. But it's not the best situation if you roster a Jets running back, but I think it's probably still about the same spot that I felt last week, where by hook or by crook, they're going to figure it out and just scrap together, like you said, a few points, enough to limp out as a flex play. Yeah. It's just not something that I'm super interested in, like you're alluding to.
Yeah, I agree with that. We're both picking the Bengals to win this game. We just expect them to get their first win.
Don't make us wrong 3 times in a row.
I know.
Come on.
If they lose this game with the Jets and start the season 0-3, I mean, that nobody would have predicted that. That's just a really bad look for this Bengals offense.
Only the biggest of haters.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we'll move on to Raiders at Titans. So the Raiders, as we already kind of talked about, because I seemingly at the last second picked the right team to win against them with the Cardinals. They were leading that game almost the entire time. So an unfortunate loss for them. But monitor Hunter Renfro's concussion status as he got injured in the last play of the game. The scoop and score, I think that allowed the Cardinals to win in overtime. But Renfro did see 10 targets in week 2, so there may still be some hope for him because it wasn't looking good for him in week 1. So I guess keep an eye on him and hope he recovers well from that and can play. You got anything to add with Renfro?
No, I would just like to keep in perspective that, it seemed like Davante Adams kind of disappeared this week.
Yeah, he kind of got locked up. I mean, he was lucky to find the end zone, but I believe he only had 2 catches.
Yeah, so I think that what's more realistic is that those we talked about this last week, where the target share is kind of going to fluctuate a little bit week to week, but not to this extent, especially with Davante Adams going from 17 to however many he had this game.
Yeah.
I'm going to look that up real quick.
Yeah. I think it was like 2 for 9 or something like that. It was weirdly inefficient.
It was a 10 target decrease between weeks 1 and 2.
Wow.
So from 17 to 7. 2 for 7 for 12 yards and a touchdown. Not a typical Davante Adams week. And so I'm probably not going to read too much into Renfro's production in this game, especially with an extra quarter of gameplay.
That's fair.
I think he's still probably, if you have to flex him, you can, but I'd like to see him prove it on the field and of course, be healthy. So
and not just be the plan B option behind Davante Adams or maybe even behind Darren Waller, who we'll talk about. And it's great that maybe a little bit of negative about him because he had 17 fantasy points and a touchdown, but he weirdly played 55% of snaps versus 84%. And Foster Moreau, the second tight end, I guess I would say the second best tight end on the team, saw 61% of snaps, more than Waller. So do you think this is just kind of how the game worked out, or is this like legitimate concern for Waller?
I mean, I'm not really concerned in the sense that he still produced 6 for 8 for a touchdown and 50 yards. Like, I think it's kind of just more the fact that, maybe it was just fatigue more than anything. So
that's true.
Just being a longer game. But yeah, I think that I'm not worried about Waller. I'm not looking to trade him if I have him. I'm going to roll him out there every week, and I'm going to get what I'm going to get from him because he's a potential top 5 upside tight end.
It is just interesting to see a good week for a tight end on a week where he had 29% fewer snaps. Like that's just kind of a weird discovery more than anything, but probably not anything legitimate. But Josh Jacobs, I'll go ahead and talk about. He had 20 touches, but still did not eclipse 10 fantasy points. So not super exciting. He obviously is the running back they want to use, which used to even be a concern whenever he played in that Hall of Fame game. It seemed like they were going to be doing more of a committee. But he's not getting a whole lot of receptions, and if this whole offense is through Davante Adams, Jacobs has to be really efficient with his carries. So I would be concerned about him. Would you agree with that?
Well, I'm not panicking on Josh Jacobs quite yet because, like you mentioned, 20 touches is, that's fringe RB1 to, that's right on the edge of that kind of.
He's just probably going to be a touchdown dependent RB2.
Well, and we can talk about how in years past that, he has been a lot more involved in the passing game on most weeks, like 4 to 5 or even more targets in a game on an average basis. So I think, honestly, this is more just a slow start with a new head coach than it is something on Josh Jacobs' behalf. I'm not worried about it. 20 touches.
Would you go as far to say a buy low candidate then? I'll go on the other end of the spectrum.
That's something I'm more comfortable talking about because I think that he is getting the majority of the snaps, and it seems more like that he is going to be the lead back, despite what we all thought when he was playing a lot in the preseason.
Yeah.
I think, ultimately talent is going to show itself. I mean, he's competing against players like Amir Abdullah and the rookie Zamir White, which I haven't heard or seen much from in preseason or otherwise. But Josh Jacobs, he's getting touches. I'm not worried about him. I think you're on the right track there with buying low.
All right, interesting. We worked around to the other side, and I think that's some interesting analysis because you'd be hard-pressed to find a running back that's being valued the way he probably currently is that gets that many touches. So move on to the other end of the matchup, the Titans, who looked bad. They got crushed by the Bills, so it was the Bills at least that made them look bad. But the fourth quarter pretty much consisted of backup players because the game was already out of hand. So
yeah, we got to see Malik Willis play for a whole quarter.
Yeah, and he got like negative points because like basically all he did was fumble, right, or something like that. I don't know.
I mean, it's still tough. It's a tough task.
Playing time is playing time. Okay, but the only player I'll really talk about that had any glimmer of hope coming out of this weird game because they didn't even play really the full game, the starters, but Treylon Burks. Let's talk about him again. 8.7 fantasy points. 4 receptions on 6 targets for 47 yards. He led the team in targets, but only 45% of snaps because of how the fourth quarter went. I would say if you have Burks, be a little cautiously optimistic because I think that he's involved in this offense. Now, if this offense is that great outside of Derrick Henry, that's still up for question, but it seems like he's getting pretty good usage for a rookie, so I would be a little optimistic on him. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, and by the way, Derrick Henry hasn't been all that great through 2 weeks.
Yes, but that is usually their game plan that they force through, is my point, really.
No, I completely agree with you. I just think that, honestly, this Titans team might be frauds compared to what we saw from them last season.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say...
Talking about them being a playoff team.
Yep, I was going to say the Bills looking so good after 2 pretty blowout wins against 2 playoff teams from last season, but the Titans being, revered as a playoff team from last season may be a little too flattering for them. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll say it this way: we don't see them making it into the playoffs this year, despite they're in one of the easiest divisions. With the Texans,
the Jaguars leading that division currently.
Colts
I'm pretty
sure. And the Jaguars. The Colts look horrible.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, I'll say this: I think you gotta expect Derrick Henry to bounce back. If he goes 3 weeks single-digit fantasy points, it might be time to hit the panic button because if the offense is that terrible that they can't sustain one of the greatest rushers that we've seen in the last 5 years, I don't know what you can expect from this team realistically. So I know the question was about Treylon Burks, and yes, there is some room for optimism here, but if I can avoid it, obviously you have to continue to start Derrick Henry, but outside of that, I'm looking elsewhere in my flex, in my wide receivers. There seems to be no upside in this offense based on what we've seen so far.
Yeah, that's fair, and for all those reasons, we think the Raiders are going to get their first win in Tennessee in this one. So
yeah, they really should be. They really should be competing to be 2-1 after last week, but. I think it's about time that the Raiders have a win on the board in that division.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next game. We have Saints at Panthers, divisional matchup. So for the Saints, monitor Kamara's injury to his ribs, which kept him out of week 2. But if you had Mark Ingram as a handcuff, he wasn't that amazing. He had 12 touches, but only played in 37% of snaps, which is only 4% more than week 1 when Kamara was there, sort of playing through injury. And we kind of predicted this in our rankings videos. I think we mentioned Mark Ingram a little bit, just because of the...
I was just going to say, I mentioned it actually in our mock draft video. So a lot more people saw that take. A lot more people saw that take, and... I'll say this: Mark Ingram looked like he was running hard in that game,
he did.
But to only amount to 12 touches, like you were mentioning, his stat line was nowhere near what you expected from a running back handcuff. I'm doing air quotes for that. Ingram's not the guy. He's definitely in the twilight of his career, and this Saints offense is not focused on running backs as of yet. Nope. Even with Kamara on or off the field.
Yeah, it's the passing game, so I'll just talk about that. Michael Thomas, 18.5 fantasy points. Chris Olave, 11 fantasy points. And Landry, 6.5. So I feel like this is a little bit more representative of what we thought this wide receiver group would look like. But it's interesting to see that Olave led the team in targets with 13, which is 4 more than what Thomas had at 9. So that's interesting. And Thomas already has 3 receiving touchdowns across the first 2 games. And I looked it up, his previous stats. I think 9 is his season high. So it seems like he's getting more end zone looks, or at least just converting them more often than usual.
Yeah.
But I guess if you drafted Thomas and took the risk as potentially your wide receiver 3 or maybe even later, you got to be pretty happy because he's finding the end zone.
Yeah, I think what it really comes down to is considering who Jameis Winston was attempting to throw to last season, the fact that he has this group of wide receivers to choose from is probably just a blessing for him.
Yeah.
I mean, these are three talented wide receivers. Obviously, we like Olave as having the most upside between him and Landry, despite what we saw in week 1. But yeah, totally. Michael Thomas seems to be back in good health, and he is performing on the field. That's what we care about the most. And so, I think it's an exciting development for them.
Yeah, do you think that Olave is someone you should be targeting in trades? Maybe I'm just getting carried away of targets as I tend to, but him leading the team in targets in his second ever NFL game, I mean, that's something.
I don't think it's something yet, but
okay, that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, it's too soon to say. You would have to be really an early adopter of Chris Olave to be targeting a trade based on this one stat line. But I think there's upside, and I think if you drafted him, towards the later half of your draft, that you like the potential that you're seeing as this receiving core shakes out.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the Panthers on the other end of this game. DJ Moore had 13.3 fantasy points thanks to a touchdown. Only had 6 targets, which I believe was tied for the most on the team, but he's had 6 in back-to-back weeks, which is subpar by his standard. He usually gets targeted a lot more. But this offense, this passing offense doesn't seem amazing. Robbie Anderson kind of came back down to earth, 4.2 fantasy points, 3 receptions on 5 targets for 32 yards, and he fumbled. So maybe this is a little too harsh, but do you think Anderson's week 1 performance was a fluke?
Well, I mean, like we mentioned after in our week 2 preview, that Robbie Anderson did have a lot of his production come on one play, including a touchdown. Yeah. So... is it really that much of a fluke when you look at it like that? Not really.
That's true. I mean, yes, it
is more of a fluke when you look at it like that.
No, I get what you're saying, but this is still him getting 5 targets and 3 catches is still better than a lot of the performances he put up last season. So, which is extremely low bar, but
there were moments last season where you had to check and see if he hadn't retired. He was not involved in the slightest.
Yeah,
but. I'll say this. I think that Baker Mayfield is still figuring things out on this offense in this new scheme, new team. I would like to see a little bit more involvement from Christian McCaffrey in the passing game. Now, he has had 5 targets in both games so far, but that's not exactly the Christian McCaffrey that you drafted. Yeah. There's an argument being made that this level of usage will allow him to stay healthy for the remainder of the season, and that is very important. Don't get me wrong, but in terms of the success of this team, Christian McCaffrey has to be more involved, and that's a dangerous condition for this team because of his injury history.
It's like McCaffrey. It's like McCaffrey win a season without getting injured, but at what cost for your fantasy team for where you drafted him?
Not your fantasy team, the real Panthers NFL team. They need their best players to get more involved, and that's really what it comes down to. I agree with you. 3 catches for DJ Moore is not enough. It needs to be higher. Robbie Anderson needs to be more involved, and like I said originally, Christian McCaffrey needs to be more involved. Baker's throwing the ball all these 56 times over 2 games, but they're not going to the right people, and the right people aren't getting the production. So something's going to change. Hopefully it happens sooner rather than later. You want to go ahead and pick this one?
I'll just say I had DJ Moore as a borderline wide receiver 1 going into the season, so I'm just glad I didn't end up acting upon that because he's not in any of my teams, and I don't miss him. So I'll pick the Saints for this one. I think that they'll just overpower this team. That they have a good defense, and they have better skill players and a quarterback that seems more comfortable with the team.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think, I don't think that the changes we're talking about are going to necessarily happen overnight and affect the Panthers this week. I'm going with the Saints, who are coming off of a bit of a blowout against the Bucs.
We keep agreeing. I'm going to keep my 2-point lead.
I'm waiting for my opportunity to strike.
All right. Is it this one? We'll talk about Ravens at Patriots. I don't know if it's this one, but you are the Patriots fan. So for the Ravens, Only Ravens players were starting Lamar Jackson, who absolutely boomed. Rashad Bateman, who boomed again thanks to a deep touchdown, and Mark Andrews, who also got at least one touchdown. And then potentially J.K. Dobbins. Keep an eye on him. He still hasn't made his debut for the 2020 season because he's still dealing with that knee injury that took him out all of last season. I feel like he's the fourth option that you could potentially start on this team, but outside of that, I mean, Devin Duvernay, I think, had the opening kickoff return, but he seems like kind of fluky, so...
Yeah, I want to ask you a quick question, and this is kind of off script, but if you roster J.K. Dobbins, you probably drafted him as your RB2, maybe your RB3 if you're lucky. How willing are you to start him if he is active for this game?
I would say.
I mean, I know the team construction matters so much, but yeah,
I wouldn't be excited.
If you drafted him.
I mean, I wasn't targeting him at his ADP, so that also skews my judgment on this. But with Lamar putting up 100+ rushing yards, he didn't do nearly as much in week 1 because he didn't need to against the Jets. But in week 2, he did, breaking an NFL record for QBs in regular season for 100+ rushing yard games. But that's why everyone jokes Lamar Jackson is RB1, but as far as fantasy is concerned, there's some validity to that about how confident you are rostering an actual running back on the Ravens. But I think say there's hope.
Okay, well, I would say
hope.
I'd say the only circumstance where I would consider starting Dobbins if he's active this week is if I'm 0-2. Because if I've managed to get a win or even 2 wins without him, I'm not going to rush out and put him in my lineup, plug him in, and be like, oh yeah, this is an obvious choice. I think you're getting by with what you currently have, and that's probably safer than what could happen with Dobbins' first game.
I agree.
That's my thoughts on it.
No, I agree with that. If you're confident with your current starters, why switch it up? If he does well this week, then hey, you learned your lesson, you'll play him the next week. I mean, I agree with that. And I know we did kind of have like a little bet on who would get the most receiving yards for the Ravens, just from talking about it last episode, but Bateman had 108 and Andrews had 104. I think we both picked Andrews, but Bateman barely scraped by thanks to a big touchdown. I would say that having Lamar and Bateman on my team is great, but I'm a little skeptical of what happens if Bateman doesn't get a 75-yard touchdown.
Right, which continues to happen, and it's unsustainable.
I'm not saying I really want to sell high on him because I think he does just have a great opportunity in this offense because of the lack of other receivers. Like Devin Duvernay, I don't really care. Like I don't even think he's seeing the field a whole lot for being the second best wide receiver on the team just because of how this offense works. But
but is the receiving volume high enough to feed Bateman when he's not getting those long touchdowns? I think that's a serious consideration.
He's my 4th wide receiver that I stick in a flex, so
I get that.
That's where I have him.
I'm just saying, for the grand scheme, everyone's teams, it's more of a consideration. He has boomed in the first 2 weeks, relatively. And I think in a league where you're not starting 3 wide receivers, you're probably going to be more likely to want to sell high on him.
Yeah, so I guess I'll give my recommendation. If you're not confident with who else you have at wide receiver, or I would potentially sell high and try and get someone that's a little bit more reliable, or just look at potentially shop him on the trade market.
Just right off the top of my head, would you rather have Bateman or Brandon Cooks rest of season?
Oh, 100% Brandon Cooks.
Okay, well there you go.
But I think
that's a realistic path to get somebody like that.
Yeah, from this looking on at this point, I mean, if Bateman just continues to be legit, sure. But at this current moment, I would definitely take the floor of Brandon Cooks over Bateman.
Okay, so that's interesting to consider.
Yeah, and some people may disagree, so go after those people if you feel the way I do. All right, we'll talk about the other side, the Patriots. We usually don't do a whole lot of analysis here because it's the Patriots' fantasy offense, but here we go. Right. Damian Harris had 17 touches, one of them leading to a touchdown, but saw 40% of snaps, whereas Ramondre Stevenson had 10 touches and saw 62% of snaps. I mean, if you start Harris, if you have to start Harris because it's more likely that you have to start him than Stevenson, he needs the touchdowns, but you're probably not happy about starting either of these running backs.
No, and we talked about this, I think, in our rankings video, that it's going to become more of a committee than it was last season. I still feel like Damon Harris is the more talented of the two, honestly, just based on what I've seen.
Yeah.
But you're right. You're not thrilled about starting either one of them. And if the Ravens continue to defend like they have, then the Patriots are going to put up 40 passes. Now, I don't think that's going to happen because that's not how the Patriots play.
Yeah.
But it does open some upside for some of these pass catchers that we can talk about next.
Yeah, so I'll talk about 2 wide receivers and news or noise, although I feel like you're going to agree. We'll see. Jakobi Meyers, 18.5 fantasy points, 9 receptions on 13 targets for 95 yards. That's a Jakobi Meyers game with no touchdown, but a pretty good day. Back-to-back double-digit fantasy scores, 82% of snaps. So yeah, news or noise for Jakobi Meyers.
I think this is the hintings of news. I'm a little bit optimistic that one of these pass catchers is going to emerge in this offense. The question is, who is it going to be? And we'll talk about Nelson Aguilar next. But, Jakobi Meyers is probably the most tenured on the team in terms of being in the Patriots system.
Yeah.
That's fantasy relevant. I keep putting conditions on this, but I just want to, kind of cover my bases here. Jakobi Meyers, if he gets... It's just a matter of if he gets touchdowns, and I know that's the narrative around him already.
Yeah.
But
I will also
this
say,
volume,
though, I think he's more sneaky, and I liked... Let's see, there are portions of last season I liked having him on my team. I think the latter half when Kendrick Bourne got more involved, I didn't like it. But, you wish he'd get more touchdowns. But the fact that he's getting you those points without being touchdown dependent says a lot about his floor. And since he was drafted at the very end of drafts, I'd be inclined to think he gets a few touchdowns. He's literally booming those weeks, and then has a pretty good floor if he doesn't get them still. So,
yeah, I'll say this too, just to add on to that. With his target share in this offense, I think he's going to be a borderline flex play on most weeks. And like you said, when the rare touchdown comes around, he does kind of flirt with wide receiver 2 numbers. So, yeah. I'm a little bit more in on this, and that's why I'm calling it, the fringe bit of news that I think this is.
Yeah, so Nelson Aguilar, who actually had more points, 23 fantasy points, 6 receptions on 6 targets and a touchdown, 110 yards, 50% of snaps, which probably gives away how I feel, and if you know how he usually is used, news or noise.
This is noise to me.
Yes, agreed.
I don't trust Nelson Aguilar in the least bit. 50% of snaps is not something that you look for in your wide receivers.
Yeah.
And we've seen this from Nelson Aguilar. He probably has one of these games maybe every 2 seasons because he's just not a consistent fantasy player by any stretch of the imagination. He's been bounced around on so many teams at this stage in his career. It's just a blip on the radar. It's nothing to pay attention to.
He hasn't really been consistent since the Super Bowl winning season of the Eagles. I remember he was actually pretty consistent that season.
The only thing he was consistent in then was dropping passes, I want to say.
I still think he had a pretty good fantasy campaign compared to how he has done since. But we'll pick this game. It's actually the 2 teams who have fallen victim to the Dolphins so far this season. But I'm picking the Ravens. I think that they can overpower the Patriots enough to get it done. At least with how the Dolphins game went, they put up a better fight than the Patriots did. So that's one.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. You were more right than I was. He was wide receiver 22 in 2017.
All right, cool. So, see, I think I had him that year. I think that year I won. I had Wentz, Ertz, and Aguilar, and that helped because they were a good team that year.
Yeah, you're great at remembering that kind of stuff. Me, I'm on the next year.
I think it's because he was literally on my team, but yeah.
No, I know what you mean. Yes, I am also picking the Ravens with you, despite the Patriots fandom. I think that the Ravens put up a hell of a fight against Miami last week. Yeah. I think they're going to come out looking for revenge this week, and I think the Patriots being at home, it's just it's too high powered of an offense. I think for them to best.
Can anyone stop Lamar? Hopefully that doesn't come back to bite me because he's on my main team. All right, we'll move on to Lions at Vikings, another divisional matchup. Amon-Ra St. Brown boomed. Currently is the wide receiver 3 in PPR scoring. I guess I'll say, would you sell high on St. Brown, or do you think that he's a legitimate... I mean, you drafted him not even close to this, but is he in that wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 discussion?
So I'll answer your question and say St. Brown is legit.
Yeah.
I don't think he is a sell high candidate.
Okay.
Now, that being said, if someone wants to give you, would you take Keenan Allen for Amon-Ra?
Yeah, I think I would. I think I would.
Okay.
I'd be more inclined to take a safer option, but it is enticing what St. Brown has done, but I would be more inclined to probably take a safer
I'm rolling
option.
with St. Brown in that call, and I think he's going to find. And I asked you this last week. I was like, so where do you think St. Brown's going to get drafted next season? Like, is he going to be a round 2 pick, or like on the turn? So obviously that's the high end of his ceiling, but he's playing like a fantasy rock star. He's playing like an NFL rock star. He's got records that are very long in the making.
Yeah.
So in terms of, number of catches in consecutive games, he is really blowing up. He is having a breakout, and I think people who got him in their drafts are going to be thrilled. He could be like another league winner potentially.
Yeah. Agreed. So you definitely have some leverage if you are wanting to trade him, and if not, you're sitting pretty with where you drafted him. Let's talk about other pass catchers, because, the only thing about this backfield on the Lions that is a little concerning is Jamal Williams getting some goal line carries over Swift, but I think Swift's floor is just you're not benching him, but it is unfortunate that he's getting vultured a little bit. But yeah, Swift is still the guy. But we'll talk about the passing more. DJ Chark saw 4 targets but 0 receptions. We talked about him a little bit last week. This could have been a little bit because St. Brown boomed and Chark wasn't needed, but I wouldn't be going after Chark if he's on your waivers necessarily, but still keep an eye on him because I do think there's a role for him on this offense. But someone who should have a role in this offense that isn't really doing that well is TJ Hawkinson, who had 5.6 fantasy points. He's back-to-back single-digit fantasy scores. 89% of snaps this week, 91% of snaps last week, so he's out there. But are you panicking on Hawkinson?
I'm not sure yet. We know that Hawkinson is a fringe elite tight end. We talked about it in our tight end drinking video.
Yep.
But and I know that might be annoying to some people who didn't watch all of those, but I think there was a lot of good analysis in those videos, and I keep calling back to them because this is stuff that we were talking about in the preseason leading up to drafts, and I think the reality is that unless you're Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce, the bar is just significantly lower for tight ends. Yes, it's disappointing that he's getting single-digit fantasy games, but I don't know. This is just kind of the reality of tight end in the NFL currently. So, is it disappointing? Yes. Should you panic? Probably not yet. Not quite.
Yeah.
And, maybe this is the game that he bounces back. It's tight ends are weird, man. That's why we try to avoid playing with them when we can.
Yeah, it really isn't fun to be talking about a guy that should have been fringe elite, as we said, in the position, and he hasn't even scored double-digit fantasy points yet. So that says a lot about the position. All right, we'll move on to the other end. The Vikings. Primetime Kirk! And Monday this past week had 3 interceptions.
He looked horrible.
And I see stuff about, like, Darius Slay. He had at least 1 interception. And it was close to it.
Two.
He had 2, and I think he was close to a third or something like that. A lot of people saying
it was that he dropped one.
Yes.
Sort of. It was contested, and then the very next play, Kirk ran the exact same play and made sure that Slay got it that time. I don't want to get into a rant, but Kirk Cousins was playing that game like he had Justin Jefferson on his fantasy team and desperately needed him to go off to win because, oh my God, Adam Thielen wasn't targeted until the third quarter. What are you doing?
Yeah,
he was so horrible.
I completely agree with everything you're saying, and any sort of analysis that it's like worrying about Justin Jefferson or putting any blame on him is wrong. I feel like once Kirk goes back to this noon game, he's gonna be just fine.
One thing to blame Justin Jefferson on was Darius Slay's first pick. He ran the route incorrectly and pretty much allowed Slay to get inside coverage and pick him off. But that's one thing that I'm agreeing with people criticizing him on. But other than that, no, it was just that Kirk Cousins looked like he was playing with 2 eye patches on both eyes.
Yeah.
It's just horrible.
All right, we'll talk about. I'm gonna move on. I feel like I'm bringing up a lot of sneaky tight end ads potentially because Irv Smith, the only Vikings.
Well, that's the nature of the position, man.
That's
it's
true.
Flavor of the week.
That's true.
So
but Irv Smith,
I'm with you though.
Scored the only Vikings touchdown this past week. Had 14.6 fantasy points, 5 receptions on 8 targets, 1 touchdown, 36 yards. He saw 56% of snaps versus 31% in week 1. I think he was maybe coming back from an injury or something. I know he was injured last season, but I think it's more about easing him into the offense, so this is good to see. Rostered in 36% of leagues. Is he worth rostering?
He was in consideration for a Dalton Schultz replacement. I think that, ultimately I went with Tyler Conklin for that decision, but Irv Smith is another one that, he's getting a good amount of targets, and there's not a lot of competition elsewhere on the team for catches other than Justin Jefferson. So there's upside. I don't have any problem with you pursuing Irv Smith as a tight end fill-in or just kind of playing the game of the week.
Yeah, and as I've sort of already alluded to, I think Kirk is going to go back to being just all right and pretty good for all these options when he goes back to playing at noon Central.
Kirk
do you
Cousins,
agree with that?
just all right, pretty good.
Yeah, that should be a slogan because he's not ever single-handedly winning games for the Vikings, but he usually is good enough to not be hurting them unless it's prime time. But I see you go for the Lions, so
this is one of the opportunities I'm going to take to differentiate from you, try to get a game back. Man, I'm telling you right now, if you watch that Vikings game, you would never pick them to play. You would never pick them to win another game because they were god awful. And I think the Lions team has a lot to play for. This is a division game, and for that reason, I'm taking the Lions.
All right, it's in Minnesota. I feel like that persuades me a little bit more, but maybe I didn't get a really good chance to watch this game live. I just heard a lot about it.
It's all
so
indoors. It's all cold. This is division time.
That's true. All right, we'll move on to Eagles, the team that battered the Vikings at the Washington Commanders. So, the Eagles being propped up as a Super Bowl contender after a dominant win over the Vikings, and we already talked about this a little bit.
You laugh, but we went through it. The NFC doesn't have a lot of contenders.
They don't. So they have a path to get there, which is, I just feel like they have no chance of winning the Super Bowl, but the fact that's
not
have an
the
easy
question.
path.
The question is, will they make it?
At the end of the day, they allowed over 30 points for the Lions in Week 1, so that's what makes me feel like, are we just forgetting that happened? And no offense to the Lions, but...
And that's why I'm picking the Lions to beat the Vikings, but let's continue.
That's fair. All right, so, Eagles. Jalen Hurts' rushing floor has made him the QB3. He's only thrown 1 passing touchdown and is the QB3.
Hey, pretty good.
Yeah. We talked about Kenneth Gainwell a little bit last week, but he only had 3 touches, and Boston Scott had more touches than him at 5, so... even in a handcuff situation, he might not be clear-cut. But Miles Sanders had 20 touches. That's good to see. But I guess keep an eye on this backfield because at the end of the day, they do use a lot of running backs, and they still have Jalen Hurts. So
they do. I think if you go in with the understanding that Miles Sanders is not going to be the workhorse, obviously this split is pretty favorable.
Yeah.
But that's not always the case, and so that's kind of the thing. Like, maybe this is a sell high opportunity because although he only got just over 11 fantasy points, it's still, I don't know. I never wanted to draft Miles Sanders, and maybe he'll prove me wrong this season. But like you said, there are other guys nipping at his heels, just taking touches away, and that's not what you look for from your, where he went in drafts. He was probably your 3rd or 4th, maybe wide or running back. But
yeah.
I don't know. I just don't know what to really make of Miles Sanders' usage in this offense. Like, he looks good when he gets opportunities, but he just doesn't get as many opportunities as you would like. So,
yeah, and A.J. Brown...
do with that what you will.
Yeah, I'll move on to the pass catchers now, even though this seems to be a run-first offense with Hurts at quarterback, of course. But A.J. Brown and Goddard both did decent, as you expected, but Devontae Smith had the biggest change from Week 1 in a positive direction. He had 15 fantasy points, 7 receptions on 7 targets for 80 yards. Week 1, he had 0 receptions. So you like to see that. We'll see what Week 3 brings for him. Hopefully it's not an every other game thing, kind of like the meme of Myles Gaskin from last season. Hopefully that doesn't happen to Devontae Smith.
That's a throwback.
But yeah, 0 receptions to 7. I mean, this is more like you expected from him, so keep an eye on him to see
Yeah.
if there's more to come like that.
Yeah, I think this is more. I think, like you are saying, this is more to come.
Yeah.
There is more to come from Devonta Smith. I think week 1 was an outlier. I don't expect anything like that to happen again this season to that extent.
It was just A.J. Brown's day. I mean, he got like almost 30 points without a touchdown.
It was like
or
it was
something.
opening day. They had to let the new toy get his shine.
I will say, because I've been a little bit negative about the Eagles as like a Super Bowl contender, although their path is easy, so I kind of agree with that now.
Yeah,
but
pick against them if you want.
I think we'll see about that. Their defense against the Lions wasn't great, but it was strong against the Vikings. And I think that A.J. Brown is the key here, though. I think he adds another level to this offense that before used to be Hurts and whatever other running backs they want to throw behind him running the ball, and then, kind of Devontae Smith and Goddard get a little bit, but A.J. Brown just has that playmaking ability that I think creates those big plays that, they're gonna go hard on spying on Hurts and maybe blitzing, or I don't even know, just focusing on the run, and A.J. Brown just gets a 75-yard touchdown. So I think that does add a versatility to this offense that is really pushing them to the next level potentially.
I agree with that. I mean, let's not forget that last season they got smacked by the Bucs in the playoffs, but with A.J. Brown, it's more of a contest, that's for sure.
All right, so let's talk about the Commanders on the other side. Carson Wentz is playing very, very well fantasy-wise. I think is a top 5 QB currently. Mm-hmm. He had 27.78 fantasy points, 337 yards, 3 touchdowns. Good day, 54% rostered. Definitely think he's worth rostering if he's on your waivers. And do you think he's a high-end QB too for the time being, or do you expect him to kind of regress negatively to where we thought he would be?
I don't know.
Wasn't even being drafted, really.
Season long, I think it's hard to say. But for this game in particular, I think it's going to be a wake-up call. It's going to be a gut check time. And I think that Wentz may fall back to kind of what we were expecting preseason. But that doesn't really change my outlook on him season long. I agree with you. I think he is more of a high-end QB2, maybe low-end QB1 in deeper leagues.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's intriguing to see what he's been able to accomplish so far. Obviously, not against the best defenses in the league by any means, but the fact that he's putting up points, it's kind of like it's a Blake Bortles-esque rise to fantasy relevance. Like it's happening in garbage time. He's not winning games on the field, but he's winning games in fantasy lineups. So Carson Wentz is an interesting one to target off of waivers, and potentially a sell high candidate to someone desperate for a quarterback. I don't know. I mean, it's tough to trade for quarterbacks in fantasy, but you might find yourself in a position where if you're looking to make a move like that, Carson Wentz is probably going to be a piece in that play.
That's true. Something I'll briefly talk about the backfield, because really Wentz is allowing so many pass catchers to flourish. I mean, 4 different pass catchers with double-digit fantasy scores this week. But I'll talk about the backfield a little bit, because Antonio Gibson kind of went back to what we expected he would be. 12.1 fantasy points, and he got a rushing touchdown, so that really kind of helped him get to double digits. And then McKissick at 13.3 with 7 receptions. He has games like this, but he's never reliable enough to start unless other people are injured.
McKissick's a fun guy to have in best ball, but not in regular fantasy.
So
for that reason, because you don't know which J.D. McKissick you're going to on any given week. And
he's either not on the field or he's leading the team in receptions. There's no
between. And going back on Antonio Gibson, what happens when Brian Robinson comes back? During the preseason, the narrative was that Brian Robinson was the guy, and then he has his unfortunate accident, and now we have Antonio Gibson running the show, and he did well in week 1. In week 2, he fell back to reality. So for week 3. I'm thinking more of the same rather than week 1 making a reemergence, especially against this Eagles defense. They bottled Dalvin Cook, and is Dalvin Cook worse than Antonio Gibson? Hell no. So, from that perspective, we can talk about the pass catchers.
Yeah, so I'll rattle off a few stats. So McLaurin, 12.2 fantasy points, still not super exciting for where you drafted him, but he's getting the targets. Got 8 targets, 75 yards. Curtis Samuel, though, 22.9 fantasy
Oh,
points.
I just want to quickly ask, Terry McLaurin buy low?
I think so, and I can.
Me too.
Let me expand on this a little bit once I talk about all the wide receivers and kind of categorize each of them. But yeah, Curtis Samuel, 22.9 fantasy points, 7 receptions on 9 targets and a touchdown, 78 yards, and a rush for 21 yards. And then Jahan Dotson found the end zone again, which helped him get 17.9 fantasy points. So yeah, let me re-enter that discussion. So McLaurin is still currently a must-start. Like, he, I believe, is a team captain, still getting targets, even though Samuel had more. But I think that a buy low opportunity for him, I think you should maybe take advantage of it if you need a wide receiver. I was never really going after him for his ADP.
I wasn't either, but considering where his value has probably found himself now,
people think it's the Curtis Samuel show, and I think that I would take a bet.
What's more realistic?
Yeah, I would take the bet, even if he somehow, if Curtis Samuel continues to do this well, and McLaurin is still just super consistent, I'd still probably. I think there's obviously McLaurin's gonna be more consistent.
You're painting yourself in a corner, but what I hear you're painting yourself in a corner. But what I hear you saying is that McLaurin is somebody that you expect to perform better than he has in the first 2 weeks, and I think you're on the right track there. And for that reason, he's a buy low.
Yeah, honestly, this is all just really weird, so it's hard to describe it all. You got
Carson Wentz relevant in 2022. Yeah. What year is it?
Yeah, Wentz is relevant. Dotson, a rookie, has 3 receiving touchdowns. Samuel is just all of a sudden a wide receiver 1, and then McLaurin, who we thought would be the only relevant person, is just kind of doing honest work on the side, and not booming. But so McLaurin's still a must start. Do you think Samuel is a must start after those first 2 games?
I think based on the fact that he probably went undrafted and you got him off the waivers, you can probably throw him in your flex and feel good about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think he's replacing anyone's wide receiver 2. So
yeah,
it depends on the depth of your league. But yeah, I think that you have no issue starting him at this stage going into week 3. I mean, obviously the matchup is scary. So maybe if you feel like just fading all Commanders this week, other than maybe Terry McLaurin, I don't know. I think with how he's performed, you have to start him in some capacity, but maybe lower expectations because I think this defense is gonna wake them up.
Yeah, and I still think Dotson is touchdown dependent and wouldn't trust much unless he gets a game where, he does super well without a touchdown. It's been a little weird, I guess I would say, so I'm not starting him. And then another tight end find, somebody we've talked about before, Logan Thomas. In previous seasons, 12.7 fantasy points, 3 receptions on 5 targets and a receiving touchdown, 37 yards, 20% rostered. You know the drill. Is Logan Thomas worth rostering?
Sure, if the matchup entices you. I wouldn't do it this week, but for a tight end fill-in, for a bye week thing, he seems to be producing somewhat well. Obviously, that number's inflated a lot by that touchdown. Yeah. So I'm a little less interested in him overall, but it depends on what's available in your league. 20%, there's a good chance he's there.
Yeah. All right. And we talked about
pick this one.
I'm not going bold enough to pick the Commanders. I'm still picking the Eagles.
Yeah, coward. All right, that's fine.
At the end of the day, they are a good team. I really had to take a look at that NFC before I realized that Super Bowl contender claim is not that outlandish. Because if they're in the AFC, I would say no chance that they're making the Super Bowl. I'm
100% on the same page with you on that one.
Okay. Yeah, still a good team, though, and looking enticing. So I'll let you take over for the next matchup.
All right. So next we're going to talk about the Chiefs going over to play the sorry Colts. Let's go ahead and... am I wrong? Am I wrong?
My boy Pittman. Okay,
let's get off of that. No, we're not getting into that right now. Jeez, just put it away, kid. All right, let's talk about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I am pounding the table for 2 weeks in a row. Sell high. He got 15.8 fantasy points, 8 carries for 74 yards. That's efficient. 4 catches for 4 targets. That's efficient. 44 yards. 12 total touches in week 2. 10 total touches in week 1. This guy's playing less than 45% of the snaps both weeks so far. The efficiency is unsustainable. I'm losing my mind at people being hyped about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, like, oh yeah, man, he's going to be a league winner. No way. This guy is super in just a precarious situation. He is dangling on the edge of the cliff, just waiting for one bad game to just plummet his stock. I'm telling you, sell high on CEH.
I completely agree. I mean, Josh Jacobs and Miles Sanders almost have more touches after only week 2 than CEH does all season. And if that doesn't say enough, then you're never going to be convinced.
Right. I mean, let's look at his. So he's averaged in week 1 6 yards per carry. In week 2, averaged 9.25 yards per carry. And then for his receptions, this is a little bit different because catching the ball, but out of the backfield most likely, over 10 yards per catch, or over 10 yards per catch in weeks 1 and 2. It's just unsustainable. Please sell high. Do yourself a favor. Let's talk about these pass catchers quickly. Travis Kelce, 10.1 fantasy points. Disappointing, but you're not starting him.
Yeah.
So he is still a must start. Still the number 1 tight end in my eyes.
Agreed.
Juju Smith-Schuster, 4 fantasy points. Disappointing. I get it. But guess what? Patrick Mahomes said there's going to be a different pass catcher every week. This week, it was the defense and Justin Reed kicking point after. But, or actually, that was week 1. But either way, sorry, I'm coming off the high of the rant. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, 3.3 fantasy points. He's not getting it done. He did get 7 targets, which is interesting. But again,
yeah.
I don't really buy into MVS as a reliable fantasy starter. I'm keeping him on my benches. I don't even know if he should really be rostered at this point. But with Juju, I think you got to keep putting him out there because he is other than Travis Kelce, he's got the best pedigree in terms of these pass catchers. So I'm going to keep rolling him out until probably if he burns me again this week, I'll consider benching him. But that's kind of where I stand there with those pass catchers. You're not benching Travis Kelce. Don't get cute. Yeah. He is still number 1. He just had an off week. That happens. Let's talk about the Colts next. Jonathan Taylor, pick 1.01. And I don't blame you for doing it, but it did not pay off last week. 7.3 fantasy points. He got 9 carries, 1 catch, combined for 63 total yards of scrimmage.
What were they
Better
doing
days are ahead.
What are they doing giving him 10 touches against the Jaguars when they're getting shut out?
They got to keep him healthy, man. They're worried all these guys are dropping like flies. Michael Pittman can't play. The rookie can't play. He's got his head banged up. It's just...
it is almost like they had a 2-week quota for the amount of touches Taylor can had, and they realized they used up too many in week 1.
Right. Yeah, the head coach was like, we're not going to use him as much. And then he sees the stat sheet for week 1. He's like, oh, crap.
Yeah. That's true.
You're not getting much today. No, I don't know. I think, honestly, the takeaway from this is better days are ahead. Don't panic on Taylor. It's just one of those things that happens in fantasy football. Michael Pittman, obviously injured last week. I'm not going to open up a lot of opportunity for you to speak here because you'll just go on for hours and hours and hours.
I'm holding up like my hands together like in a prayer. Sort of
thing. So he could play in week 3, monitor his status. If he's playing, you're obviously starting him. He is a fringe wide receiver 1 in this offense. I will say, on top of that, Ashton Doolin did get you 13.2 fantasy points. If you were bold enough to start him, he had 7 targets for 79 yards, rush for 3 yards. This guy had 5 catches. He's a desperation flex consideration if Pittman misses again. I don't necessarily expect Pittman to miss again, but if he does, this is the guy that you should be looking for. It's not Paris Campbell. People have been trying to push that guy out for so many years. It's not happening. This seems to be the guy. This is what we're going off of. If that's what happens, that's what happens. Let's pick this game. I say the Colts remain winless, and I'm picking the Chiefs. Oh, please.
Don't. No, I'm picking the Chiefs too.
Actually, do it. Please do it. No. I want that edge.
The Colts are their defense is letting them down too much. I feel like offense to offense, But that's not what the game is. That's not what the game is. So
offense to offense, if you want to go down the line, it's not even close. I mean,
well, with the way they're being
terms
used
of,
currently, yes. But Jonathan Taylor, I think alone can beat a lot of offenses. But that again, this is irrelevant as a team.
Jonathan
the Colts
Taylor
are looking
can't
bad.
outrun Patrick Mahomes in his arm, but that's beside the point.
He's pretty fast.
You can't outrun a pass. We'll say it that way.
Yeah.
That's for all you. Yeah. Thanks.
Yep.
All right, let's talk about the Texans and the Bears. This is going to be a real stinker. All right, so Dameon Pierce completely flipped the script on all the people who were buying on Rex Burkhead. Rex Burkhead didn't even get a carry this game. Pierce had 15 carries for 69 yards and 1 catch for 8 yards.
I really just laughed because of Jack in our league picking up Rex Burkhead onto an already pitiful team. So that is funny.
Okay. So anyway, we weren't advocating for anyone picking up Burkhead. So if they had listened, they would not listen
to us.
No. And what's his record again? Anyway, not to put him on blast. 8.7 fantasy points. We play each other this week. All right, let's get back on topic. Pierce, he got you just under 9 fantasy points. Tripled his snap percentage from last week, 29 to 62. That's not triple. Never mind.
More than doubled.
Let's take a deep breath here, okay? Here's the takeaway. Rex Burkhead's not the guy you thought he was. It's Dameon Pierce, and it's not all that valuable.
Yeah.
So, moving past that, let's talk about Brandon Cooks. He was disappointing, but we've talked about him earlier in this podcast saying that he is a guy that usually has a reliable floor. Now, 9.4 is not exciting, but it is flex-worthy, depending on your league size. Yeah. And better days are ahead. He is a double-digit target getter both weeks thus far. And like I said, still a high floor flex. So I'm okay with Brandon Cooks. I'm not panicking on him. Someone I do want to mention, and we talked about him late last season when we were discussing DFS options, which is Nico Collins. 9.8 fantasy points this game. 4 catches on 9 targets for 58 yards. I think he's a player to watch on this offense. I have him rostered in a couple leagues as a late-round flyer, and I think that, if things work out, he could find himself in a consistent wide receiver 2 role in this offense, and that's valuable whenever it's when you're considering someone this late in drafts.
Yeah, I know in DFS you liked Brevin Jordan sometime for his price, and at the end of the day, It might be people that most fantasy managers are like, who? But at the end, like I said, at the end of the day, there's got to be a second pass catcher that has some relevance, you would think, behind Brandon Cooks. So, yeah, potentially good option.
All right, let's talk about the Bears on this other side. Okay, here we go. David Montgomery, 15.5 fantasy points. He's got the volume of a running back that needs to be started, even if it's at a flex. He's the only Bear worth starting right now. Yeah. Let's transition to the passing game. Chicago had 11 pass attempts in all of week 2. 11. So, if you drafted Darnell Mooney, if you drafted Cole Kmet, I think you need to make other plans because this offensive scheme needs to change in a significant way before you can trust any of these pass catchers. I mean, I know you're in agreement with me on this. We talked about it earlier off camera, but both of those guys, they're droppable, honestly.
Yeah. I wouldn't drop Mooney, personally. I mean, if we keep on going and they keep on not passing, but
if you're 0-2, I think you can drop him. I mean, he's probably not. Well, he's wide receiver 127. That's one of my favorite stats.
I just feel like if you're 0-2, it's not only Mooney that's disappointing you. You know what I'm saying? I feel like he was drafted at a point where you didn't have a ton
but in the
of
same
stock
breath, in the same breath, when you start off the season 0-2, 0-3, you got to start taking some of these upside guys out of your lineup and try to plug in some guys that are actually producing on the field now.
Sure.
And Darnell Mooney does not qualify as someone producing on the field now, and he can't. He honestly can't with 11 pass attempts. I mean, what best case scenario? He catches all of them, and has that ever happened before? I would argue no. So this is a really ugly game to pick. I'm gonna go. Okay, so you're going with the Texans.
I am upset of the week. Big upset.
I don't know, man.
They are the 3-point underdog.
Underdogs.
Rankings,
yeah. I don't know.
I just feel hey, if the Texans forced a tie with the Colts and they forced an ugly one with the Broncos, maybe it's not those two offenses. Maybe it's the Texans. That's all I'm saying.
You know what? Just for the sake of not being wrong and losing another game in our spread, I'm gonna go with the Texans. It's a long season. I got plenty of time to make up those two games, so I'm gonna go with you on the Texans because I don't have any confidence. If I could pick neither, I would pick neither.
I feel like you want to pick the tie. That could be a
let me pick the tie and yeah, exactly.
I mean, I feel like it's just fundamentally a team that has 11 pass attempts is just doing something wrong. So I think at the end of the day,
this isn't 1926. Like, this is 2022. They need to be throwing a hell of a lot more. So are we ready to move on?
Yes, to the afternoon of Sunday.
Yes, to the afternoon. Good afternoon, Jaguars at Chargers. Let's talk about the running backs first. James Robinson. Now, I advocated for flexing both of these players if you needed to, but avoiding it if you could, just until there was a bit more of a formula, we'll say, to how these guys are being used. James Robinson seems to be the lead back in this team now. He played 63% of the snaps. He outcarried Travis Etienne 23-9. I think, honestly, James Robinson can be a flex pretty safely. You don't love the matchup, but Etienne should stay on your bench until something changes. I mean, do you disagree?
I don't, and I'm sad because I drafted Etienne. I'm sad.
I did too.
I think Robinson is safer at the moment, and the only thing I'll say, I mean, especially if that, just the difference in touches, but the only thing I'll say is that the Jaguars haven't really ever been playing from behind too heavily, although most people would expect them, and this could be the game against the Chargers. And I feel like in a game script where they're coming from behind, Etienne theoretically is this pass-catching guy, and I know it's not like James Robinson isn't, but if that's where they want to get Etienne more involved, I think that could get his floor higher and kind of change the narrative. But still not going to bank on that going into this week. I would just, if that happens, you feel better, and I wouldn't be surprised because I find it hard to believe that, I know that Robinson has done well for this team for the past 2 seasons, but they didn't draft Etienne for no reason, and Robinson's coming back from an Achilles tear. Miraculously, he's back and just getting this usage, but I just feel like Etienne's current usage is more the fact that he's only played 2 NFL games, and I think that they're just figuring out how to work with him, with Robinson, and I think his ceiling is still higher because of a pass-catching floor in fantasy.
Yeah, maybe. I just feel like, the volume that Robinson is seeing, especially in last week's game, I mean, that's 25 touches. And that's,
no, I agree.
I mean,
and if my
really
game
good.
script and scenario doesn't pan out for Etienne, then I'm probably more inclined to say, he's got no chance to really pass Robinson unless he gets injured.
Yeah, as of right now. Yeah, I think bench him for now to be safe. Let's talk about Christian Kirk, the $1 million man, so to speak. 25.8 fantasy points. He got 6 catches on 6 targets for 78 yards and both of Trevor Lawrence's touchdowns. 6 fewer targets than the previous week, but Lawrence was extremely efficient in this game. He threw 25 for 30, 235 yards. I mean, just let me ask you this: is it time to sell high on Christian Kirk, or is this legit?
I think that's interesting. I think it's legit, but I think that he's not going to be scoring this much. So if someone's really seeing this and being like, "Wow, this guy's like certainly a wide receiver too," I think he's more of a flex and a safe flex at that after his 2 performances. So if you can find someone that has a discrepancy with how they value him enough to warrant selling high, but I still think at the end of the day, he's a legit starter on your team and you're happy with where you drafted him. It's just about finding that person that could potentially overpay for what his probably current wide receiver ranking is, positional ranking is, because that's probably
Yeah.
too high.
I'm inclined to agree with you. I think that he is legit probably for this season, he's going to be a consistent part of your offense. Mike, obviously the sell high aspect of it is, are we seeing his ceiling? And I think arguably yes, and so that would make him a candidate for that. But again, that's it's up to you to decide based on your situation if it's worth potentially negotiating for an upgrade off of Christian Kirk's recent success. I'll briefly talk about Evan Ingram because the theme of today's show seems to have been tight end pickups.
Yeah.
Evan Ingram got 11.6 fantasy points. He had 8 targets, caught 7 of them for 46 yards. He's a waiver consideration for Dalton Schultz managers. Outside of that, take your pick. We've talked about so many. It's up to you guys to decide who you value the most. Let's go ahead and move on to the other side of this game, which, of course, is the home team with the Chargers. And there are some question marks here. Justin Herbert, ribs, monitor his status. Initial reports suggest he could play, and that would be a big improvement. I'm going to double-check the roster because I don't actually know who the backup is currently.
I don't either. It's not.
It is
Tyrod
Chase
Taylor.
Daniel. Chase Daniel would be the guy next up. That's not very interesting to me. So if that happens, that's a bit of a yikes. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the pass catchers that may also be coming back, which would be, of course, Keenan Allen with a hamstring. Monitor his status. And again, we're going to upgrade Mike Williams if Allen misses week 3. And Carson, let me ask you, are there any other pass catchers after we saw week 2 without Keenan Allen? Are there any other pass catchers you'd consider flexing if Allen misses?
If Allen misses and Herbert doesn't, if Herbert misses too, I think definitely not. If Herbert plays
You
and
fade.
Allen misses,
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that it will just be the Mike Williams show again. But I think that Gerald Everett, who I see that you'll talk a little bit later, would be the only legit other option, because I think that
and you're not gonna necessarily flex the tight end. So I think we're on the same page in terms
another
of
wide
pass
receiver.
catchers.
Probably not.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was looking for. So that's a note to all you out there. If you have Mike Williams, it's an upgrade if Keenan Allen misses, and if you don't have Mike Williams and you're missing Keenan Allen, I don't think there's a replacement on this team that you can easily pivot to.
No.
Let's quickly talk about Austin Eckler. He got 18.5 fantasy points. What are your thoughts so far if you drafted Eckler? So I'm going to give you some more background because I kind of just dropped that question on you. He's currently running back 13.
Yeah, and I know that some people probably drafted him as early as the 3rd pick at the very earliest, and I was always thinking that I would take Cooper Jefferson at that spot because I feel like there was a big dip after Taylor and Matt Caffrey going into drafts. I feel like, Eckler getting 9 receptions is really, really good. So I feel
that is really
like
good.
I don't think
the problem is that he's so inefficient
him.
on the ground.
That he is. But I think that his receiving work just keeps him at an elite floor to just, if he gets a touchdown, we're talking about a player that's probably a top 5 finish in the position in the week. So, yeah, it's not super flashy or exciting, but he's involved in the pass catching, and doesn't seem like anyone else is taking snaps away from him at the position. So, I guess you're like fine with it.
The fullback's gotten a couple touchdowns off of some goal line work, but
yeah, that would be annoying.
I know that's not exactly. So shout out to Xander Horvath, the rookie fullback for the Chargers. But anyway, I think you're right. You're totally right. Austin Eckler, nothing to panic about with him. Not returning the value at where you drafted him currently. But with that passing game usage, and if touchdowns come around, which, I talked about how he wasn't going to get anywhere near 20 touchdowns like he got last season. The regression was just too obvious to not mention.
I could
yeah,
be wrong in
nothing-
this. I want to
nothing
say
to
something
concern.
like the top 10 wide receivers at the moment have more points than the running back one. And if that's not true, it's still close because it seems like wide receivers are moving much more than those top end running backs. So I don't know if that exact statistic is true, but the running backs aren't really booming yet. So, you know,
Yeah,
if you're
there might
feeling
be a
sorry for
shift.
yourself for having Eckler, at least you don't have Derrick Henry. Or at least you don't. Even McCaffrey and Taylor have had slow starts, so I wouldn't panic too much.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I think it's more important that people know that, you know, you took this guy early with your pick, but there's still hope with the way that he's being used. So
Yeah.
just important to mention that early on in the season. Let's quickly talk about Gerald Everett, 13 fantasy points. Currently the tight end 4 through 2 weeks. Do you believe in Everett season long? Because this is a guy coming into week 1 that I said, this is a player to watch. Being in a Justin Herbert-led offense, they've shown to be effective in getting the tight end involved. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. I was pretty high on him going into the season,
Yes.
especially with him pretty much being undrafted. I mean, he got a touchdown week 1, which helped his production, but a good offense, one, and a tight end that is getting double digits without a touchdown in a given week, that alone sets him above so many people that unless you have an elite tight end. So,
Right.
yeah, I believe in him, and I think that he hasn't done amazing before because he hasn't been prioritized, but it seems like Herbert likes to use the tight ends a little bit, so yeah, I think that gives him a safe enough floor. And I agree, Chargers are going to win against the Jaguars, current divisional leaders that they were going up against in their own respective division.
Right, yeah, I'm going with the Chargers as well. Does it change your pick at all if Herbert misses? Would you go with the Jags on that end? And this is just hypothetical. We're going to lock in the Chargers here, not knowing if he's going to play or not. But
Probably not. I think
Yeah,
their
I think so
defense is
too.
still
I think the defense
can overpower the
agreed.
Jaguars, and then they still have Eckler and Mike Williams who will make plays, either rushing or receiving. So
yeah, I'm with you on that. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the next matchup. That is a potential shootout candidate, which is the Rams at the Cardinals. So far, that has been the case with both of these teams so far.
sure.
So let's talk about the running backs. Darrell Henderson got you just under 11 fantasy points. He did find the end zone once, played 56% of the snaps, inconsistent usage in the passing game, and touchdown dependent in this committee. Let's go ahead and pivot quickly to Cam Akers now, who definitely showed up, at least on the box score. 8.2 fantasy points. He had 15 carries, which I thought was surprising. I found that interesting. 44 yards. And 2 catches on 3 targets for 18 yards. So this is an improvement, but definitely not the RB2 that you drafted him as. What do you do if you roster Cam Akers?
Well, what you should have done was watch our videos and see in the preseason and see that we thought that he was the most overrated player by ADP
Sheesh.
because we were right. I think that you
So
can't
far.
really start him. If we're not even starting... That's not a fair comparison. I'll do a different comparison. It's not even a comparison. It's a split backfield with a team that has Cooper Kupp.
Mm-hmm.
So then you start to enter like it's almost Bills. I will make a comparison. It's almost like the Bills backfield. If they're always
It's not that
passing the
bad.
ball, this wasn't even.
They got
an unfair
25
one.
carries. They got 25 carries. That's not a
I
fair
agree.
comparison.
I agree, but I almost said Jaguars as my first comparison, so I at least did it a little bit better than that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't like them. A team that has Cooper Kupp and Allen Robinson, and you want a running back that's currently getting split snaps.
Okay.
don't
Well,
want
I
them,
understand.
actually, but you
I
drafted
understand all of that, but I want you to actually try to give some actionable advice to people. Like, is Cam Akers is he a buy low? Is he a bench? Is he a drop? Like, what is he?
He's a bench. I don't think
Okay.
he's a buy low
Wait
because
and
we
see.
didn't like his situation going into it, so it's not like this is that surprising. I mean, how bad it was last week was surprising, but it's a wait and see. You're not dropping, of course, but I'd like to think that you could get it. You have a better running back that could play at that second slot, and that you have better wide receivers to play at flex.
Okay. All right, let's talk about Allen Robinson next. 15.3 fantasy points. He did have his second touchdown called back due to an injury on the field.
Oh, that's news
The whistle was blown mid-air, and he caught it. They were right on the goal line, so it was just kind of like they actually lined him up in the backfield and just ran a table route out of the backfield. But the whistle was blown in with the ball in midair, and the touchdown was called back because of an injury on the field. So his day could have been a lot better, but still, with 15.3 fantasy points, you're happy with that production.
Yeah.
Certainly an improvement on week 1. But I'll ask this: what happens when Van Jefferson returns? Because he was a very solid double-digit most weeks wide receiver on this team. I mean, what happens? Or what are your expectations?
I had Woods and then picked up Jefferson, so I do know that he was actually pretty reliable. I will say, though, that before Jefferson wasn't super reliable, he wasn't super reliable when Robert Woods was out there. He became reliable once that wide receiver 2 slot opened up. So I would like to think that Robinson can hold him off, but it is a little bit concerning to see what he'll do to this offense. But yeah, that's really all I can say. I hope he doesn't impact Robinson too much as someone who has them on both of their teams.
Okay, I think that's a fair point. So we'll go ahead and move on here. I am not going to mention. I have to, I guess, but Tyler Higbee. He's heavily rostered. I think he's looking like Stafford's second favorite pass catcher. He's got 20 targets through 2 weeks. Got you 14.1 fantasy points this week. If he is not rostered in your league, you need to pick him up because he's one of the highest upside tight ends that could be available. So nothing really more to add on that. Let's just move on to the Cardinals. And we want to talk about first James Conner, who left this game with an ankle injury. It's not considered serious or long-term, which is good for those who manage James Conner. But I will say this. Darrell Williams will get the start if Conner can't play. Given the matchup, I would recommend looking elsewhere for a Conner replacement. And I don't think you disagree with me. There's just...
Yeah.
Benjamin, Darrell Williams, those are not guys that I think are going to make a difference on your team in fantasy.
No, I agree with that. I think that, we even see at that role for Conner, he can sometimes be a little TD, touchdown dependent, so I wouldn't expect this handcuff just to explode in that position.
Right. All right, and then here's one for the boys back home, Greg Dortch, 15.5 fantasy points. He got 4 catches on 4 targets for 55 yards and a touchdown. He's got back-to-back double-digit fantasy weeks. This guy came literally out of nowhere, I feel like.
Yeah.
Only true Cardinals fans knew his name before week 1, I feel like. And I'll just say this, because it's the question on, I think, most people's minds that roster Rondale Moore is what happens to Dortch when Rondale Moore returns?
Great question. As someone who has Rondale Moore on my team.
Right?
I think the fact that Dortch was like a complete unknown before these past 2 weeks, it's really hard to answer that because we thought that Moore would look good going into week 2 because seems like
the
Dortch...
concern... Sorry, I was just going to say the concern is that he has played his way into a role on this offense.
Yeah.
And when you drafted Rondale Moore as like a breakout candidate, and now this new guy comes in while Rondale Moore is getting healthy, it's like, oh crap, maybe this guy is going to stick around and become a thorn in my side with Rondale Moore.
Yeah.
So I think there is legitimate concern that Dortch does remain involved in this offense and kind of lowers Rondale Moore's upside. But I do also want to say, we talked about prior to week 1, Cliff Kingsbury has said that they want to get Rondale Moore some manufactured touches in this offense. So there is still the potential upside there to be, sort of like a Deebo Samuel type role, a wide back maybe. And if that's the case, he does have some independent value regardless of Dortch's usage in the offense. It's just something to consider, and I think that it's more of an interesting kind of wait and see situation more than anything else. We can go ahead and pick this game, and I'm going to wait to see who you go with. You've gone with the Rams, I see.
Yeah.
And
I'm somehow
I can't-
1-1 from picking the Cardinals in 2 straight weeks, and I'm not going to get greedy with them. And
Yeah,
I'm just remembering
I can't.
and I know this was in Los Angeles, but the Rams smacked the Cardinals in the playoffs last year. So,
Right.
yeah.
No, I can't go against. I can't pick the Cardinals. I didn't pick them to win last week. They should not have won last week. The Raiders choked that game away. Not salty, of course. Obviously, I love when the Raiders lose, but yeah, to go against the Super Bowl champs with a team that I don't believe in particular. No, I'm going with the Rams. I'm sticking with you on this one.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and move on to the next game.
All right.
So that would be Packers at Buccaneers. And this one, it's going to be pretty short. We're talking about the running backs. Aaron Jones put up a big game, 32 fantasy points, 15 carries, 132 yards and a touchdown, and then 3 catches for 38 yards on 3 targets for another touchdown. He tripled his carry total from week 1 and delivered on them. Don't check my math on that, but I'm pretty confident that's the triple I actually meant. A.J. Dillon, on the other hand, 7.7 fantasy points. A disappointing day, but when you look closer at the stat line, 18 carries, 3 targets in the passing game, only caught 1 for 6 yards. That usage, his workload, warrants a flex spot. And I think that you would agree with me on that, because when you see that much volume go to a running back, you can't bench him.
Yeah, he got more touches than Jones. A.J. Dillon did. Jeez, keep on mixing up their names. A.J. Dillon got more touches than Aaron Jones.
Yeah, that's technically true. Yeah.
I would go as far to say, is Aaron Jones a sell high?
Potentially. It's hard to say because, his value, obviously it wasn't great coming out of week 1. And then off of this game, it's more like, things have kind of reset themselves. So I don't know necessarily if you can sell high, because I think he's kind of at his pre-week 1 value now.
Yeah.
But I feel like A.J. Dillon is a buy low.
Yeah, I
think that people could be like, hey, Dillon kind of fell off. Maybe he's a 1 week. People who rostered A.J. Dillon coming into week 1 thought, hey, this guy's coming off of a bad game in week 2. I don't know. Maybe he's not the guy that we thought he was. But, either way, I think both of these running backs have value on your team, and I'm comfortable starting both of them week in and week out. The matchup's not great for this one, but as we'll get to with the pass catchers, Aaron Jones tied for the team high in catches with Sammy Watkins, Randall Cobb, and Christian Watson, which was 3 total catches. You can't start any of these pass catchers. So you're starting the running backs. You don't love the matchup, but it's kind of what you have to do if you roster them based on their workload. And then on the other side of this game, let's talk quickly about Mike Evans, who got ejected for fighting. This is the second time in his career involving Marshawn Lattimore. Suspended 1 game. He did appeal the suspension. It was rejected. No surprises there. Make other plans if you roster Mike Evans. He is officially going to be inactive in week 3.
One thing I want to jump in and say is I saw a clip of him talking to the refs after they probably had ejected him, and you can read his lips, and he says something like, "That's Tom Brady. What am I supposed to do?" I like that as a defense. I like that as a defense.
Well, it does not justify. Tom Brady was in no danger. That's the thing about it. It's just that Mike Evans definitely has bad blood towards Marshawn Lattimore.
Yeah,
Lattimore gets under his skin in a very bad way, and it brings the worst out of Mike Evans. In terms of fantasy production, he wasn't as bad as we thought, but I did say lower expectations. Got you 9.1 fantasy points before being tossed, but yeah, it's bad behavior on the field, and there's no excuse. Tom Brady was in no danger. There was no need for that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Chris Godwin, still lingering with that hamstring injury. Go ahead and monitor his status as always. I expect a heavy workload if he does play, which I know is kind of counterintuitive because of the coming off of a soft tissue injury, which is really easy to re-aggravate. But considering how shallow the position seems to be, like they just signed Cole Beasley to their practice squad, and that was a guy that couldn't even make a roster up until now. So, I mean, you're not starting Cole Beasley under any circumstances. Maybe a DFS flyer, because I'm sure he's probably near minimum value in salary.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, Russell Gage, I stopped trusting him the week that I had him when he was for the Falcons, and he got 0 targets in a healthy game. And he has a hamstring issue that's lingering. And then Julio Jones, I mean, God bless him, he's still trying to come out and play, but he's got a knee problem that held him out of last week and continues to be a question mark for him. I don't know, man. No Mike Evans, potentially no Chris Godwin. You can't start any of these guys.
No,
and
you can't.
And
I agree.
it's so tough. It's so tough for Tom Brady, and obviously, yeah, boo-hoo, Tom Brady. We hate him, right? That's how people feel. But but I'm just saying, this team has fallen apart week after week after week. Just, I don't know. What I'm trying to say is that this is not how I want to see Tom Brady's career end. Is with just a broken team around him. I'm hoping later in the season people get healthy and they can make a push for the playoffs. But for this week 3 against the Packers, pretty much the only guy that I'm comfortable starting, and this is with Tom Brady in mind, it's Leonard Fournette. He only got you 9.5 fantasy points, but the volume, the workload, 24 carries, 2 catches, it warrants a starting job. You got to have patience with Lenny, and that's all I'm picking for this one.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But as you know, Brady's gotten it done with nobodies before.
I know, but it's a combination, man. The offensive line is not quite there.
I'm picking the Buccaneers in this, and
I know you are. I know you are.
That's a little bold. They are the favorite by 1.5 points.
1.5 points at home. I know. I was hoping you were going to go Packers, because then I could at least be like, hey, I picked my guy, but I don't have any faith in this team right now. There's nobody to count on. I don't know. I'm really at a loss.
Give me Brady. No, you pick the team that you actually think. All right, come on.
I know. Honestly, all right, fine. I'm going with the Packers. It hurts me, but I'm going with the Packers in this one.
Brady, I'm the biggest Brady fan on the podcast.
Dude, I hope I'm wrong, honestly, because I want the Buccaneers to have success, but
yeah.
I just can't, man. I can't with this team. It's just there's no one to pass to. If Chris Godwin plays, I want to say this: if Chris Godwin plays, I don't even know if it's going to make a difference. Honestly, I'm going Packers.
All right.
Let's talk about the next one. That's I feel gross. I'm gonna shower after this. Let's talk Falcons Seahawks. Okay, so one of the guys coming into this season that I was high on is Drake London. He was the number 8 overall pick in the NFL draft. He got you 24.5 fantasy points this past week. He looks like the clear wide receiver 1 in this offense, and my bold prediction going into the season was that London was going to catch double-digit touchdowns in his rookie year. So, Carson, I'll ask you, do you believe?
I think I believe. I mean, he was the first wide receiver taken off the board in the April NFL draft, and he's definitely has the size to be a red zone threat. And you're about to talk Kyle Pitts. It's seeming like they're preferring London. Yeah, I think that he can eclipse 10 receiving touchdowns, and I love those USC boys, even though I don't even really watch them in college, but Pittman's one of them, so got to bring him up.
No, you used it as an excuse to get Pittman involved, and I hate that. We're going on to Kyle Pitts. Okay, Kyle Pitts, 3.9 fantasy points. He has the physical abilities to be an elite tight end. The offensive scheme is holding him back. It needs to change in order to feature Pitts more. I'm saying this, don't panic on Pitts. The bar for tight ends, other than Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews, is so low. I understand that Kyle Pitts went early in drafts. He was drafted around the 3rd and 4th round. But that being said, He has upside. We saw it from him last season. Didn't he finish as, what was it, tight end 6?
That sounds
Do you remember
about
that?
right. That
Okay, I'm going
seems
to double
right.
check that real quick.
I think
Yes,
I
tight
think
end
the
6
Falcons
in
head
PPR.
coach said something when questioned about the usage of Pitts is like, we're playing to win games, not fantasy football matchups. I think he literally said that, so that's kind of
Yeah, that's kind of cringe because Kyle Pitts would help you win games.
Yeah.
So, because he is a difference maker on the offense when he has the ball in his hands. So that's a that's a poor take from that guy. But yeah, don't panic on Pitts. You drafted him early. You're going to have to deal with it. But the bar for tight ends is so low. I mean, we've been talking up all these guys that are potential fill-ins for Dalton Schultz, but you're not going to realistically take one of those guys and start him ahead of Kyle Pitts. If Kyle Pitts is healthy and playing, you're playing Kyle Pitts. Just stop it, okay? It's fine.
Yeah.
On to running backs. Cordero Patterson had 4 fantasy points, 4.1 to be exact. 41 rushing yards on 10 rushes. He shared the workload with rookie Tyler Algier, who got 3 fantasy points, also 10 carries for 30 yards. So slightly less efficient. But let me ask you this. How concerned are you if you roster Cordero Patterson?
Well, I feel like we talked about him last week of him overperforming because with where he was drafted, it's because of performances like this that he had at the end of last season. So I think that this is not surprising and that you drafted him is probably not even making your starting lineup. And yeah, don't drop him. But he can have those big weeks like
your
he did
window,
last week.
Your window to sell high might have
It
shut.
was very short. Yeah, we were recommending that, and
Yeah.
it seems like that already shut on your fingers.
Ouchie.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the Seahawks. For the running backs, Rashad Penny and Ken Walker combined for 10 carries and 25 rushing yards. That's not good. Despite the matchup against the Falcons, this team can rarely support one fantasy-relevant running back, let alone 2. I'm benching them both if I can afford it. I mean, would you agree?
Yeah. Combined for
I
10
know
carries.
I know Rashad Penny is your Hall of Fame first ballot candidate.
Oh, yeah, when he's healthy.
If healthy.
But we talked about his performance in week 1 with no Ken Walker, so seeing this with Ken Walker, yeah, it's you're not looking to start either of them.
Yeah. And then for wide receivers, DK Metcalf, 7.5 fantasy points. He had a long catch called back for offensive holding. Did you happen to see that on social media or anything?
I didn't. No, I haven't.
Okay. Basically just absolutely just planted one right on the defender's forehead and grabbed it with one hand. It was quite the sight. But that did not actively affect his point total for the week. Like I said, you probably need to continue starting him based on where you drafted him. As of right now, I mean, you and I both advocated for waiting on DK Metcalf because of the offense, it wasn't going to be able to sustain the DK Metcalf we've seen over the past few years. The player is talented, the team just isn't, and that's really what it boils down to. On the other hand, Tyler Lockett, 19.7 fantasy points, 9 catches on 11 targets for 107 yards. That's exciting. But he's a boom-bust guy. And it really just depends on how lucky you feel week to week if you're starting Tyler Lockett. I was saying, in a previous episode that these are great guys to get in best ball because when they boom, you reap the rewards. When they bust, someone else fills in the spot. But that's what it comes down to with these guys. It's not a fun situation if you roster any of these Seahawks players, and I think you're going to go ahead and join me on this one, taking the underdogs, the surprising underdogs.
I was hoping that maybe you wouldn't go with the Falcons, but the Falcons have had back-to-back tough losses.
Dude, I've got no reason to pick the Seahawks. I think
That's
they stink.
true.
So, yeah.
We used to joke that I was partially a Seahawks fan, but maybe I was a Russell Wilson fan because I feel nothing in my heart yearns for them anymore. So,
right. Okay, let's talk about Sunday Night Football. This is kind of a snooze fest in my opinion. And I no offense.
That's
right. No, more like let's hide because the Broncos are sorry right now. Let's talk 49ers Broncos. Trey Lance, let's go ahead and start this off. This is important to mention. Season-ending injury, a fractured ankle, required surgery. All reports suggest that the surgery was a success and no complications, which is great. We're rooting for a quick and successful recovery and hopefully seeing him start next season. It'll be interesting to see what the 49ers do with Jimmy Garoppolo's contract because he is only on the books for 1 year. So you think they bring him back another year once Trey Lance is healthy and do the whole thing all over again? I hope not, for his sake.
Yeah.
I know. It's just like it sucks. It's such bad luck for Trey Lance, who I think shows a lot of promise just based on his intangibles, but unfortunate. And we can go ahead and let's talk about Jimmy Garoppolo. He's the guy filling in his shoes. Last year, and I'm saying this most likely after waivers have cleared for most leagues, but he finished last season as QB 17. Hopefully you didn't rush out to pick him up. I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo is the answer to your quarterback needs.
He's like the definition of mid. He really is. He's mid. Jimmy Garoppolo is mid.
At QB 17, he quite literally is mid.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and talk now about the running backs. So Jeff Wilson had 12.3 fantasy points last week. He got 18 carries for 84 yards, 2 catches on 2 targets for 19 yards. He did split carries with rookie Tyrion Davis-Price, who only managed 3.3 fantasy points on 14 touches. However, TDP did suffer an injury that's going to, and I don't recall the specifics of it at the moment, but it's going to require him to miss a little bit of time. And so with Deebo Samuel being the only other player logging any significant amount of carries, he got 4 carries for 53 yards. That's efficient. It's going to be Jeff Wilson as long as all the other running backs are hurt, which seems to be a theme with San Francisco. There must be something in the water there. But Jeff Wilson's going to be the guy, and Deebo Samuel's going to get his carries. I just don't know. I mean, Carson, what are your thoughts on rostering Jeff Wilson through this stretch?
I do roster him on my main team, and I think that I like what he did with his carries compared to TDP. Is that what we're calling him, the rookie? Obviously, Deebo is the most efficient, quote-unquote, running back that they have, but I think that Jeff Wilson probably has a somewhat safe floor, but again, like we said last week, not super excited. Hey, I'm glad he did what he did this week because this is a little bit better than I even expected, but
yeah,
probably worth rostering. I'm in a situation where ETN was my RB2, so I'm kind of taking more shots on these type of guys. But if you don't need to do that, then I don't think he's a super exciting person to need to go after.
I just think it's a crowded running back by committee. Obviously, the injuries kind of open it up for Jeff Wilson to do something. It's just a question of how much he really gets done. And, of course, without Trey Lance, there's less rushing threat from the quarterback. So goal line work might be more viable for these running backs. But even still, I mean, Deebo Samuel seems like the number one guy you want on this team. And then, of course, when George Kittle's healthy, probably him is second. Let's go ahead and talk about the Broncos now. They are
I'm reading this for the first time
underdogs.
Right now, so here we go.
I'm putting you on the hot seat, Carson, because there are some serious questions that need to be answered. Russell Wilson got just over 11 fantasy points last week. He has 2 passing touchdowns through 2 weeks. Here's who he played. On the road to Seattle, his former team, and home to Houston. We've already agreed that both teams are not good. So here's the other stat that I found really interesting. Russell Wilson, through 2 games, has 3 carries for 5 total rushing yards. So at that pace, what is that, like 90 yards for the season? So this is a guy that has rushed for 500 plus multiple years in his career. So let me ask you right now, just straight up, did Denver extend the wrong guy for the job? $165 million guaranteed at $245 million total over 5 years. Hello?
How dare you? How dare you? How dare you say this?
Oh, really?
I am still inclined to think that it's a new offense, a new head coach, a new quarterback. I think that you can still have hope. Yes, it's concerning those first 2 games, but to say, is it the wrong guy? I couldn't make that claim yet, and I won't make that claim. I think that the rushing yards are a little disappointing. A
little?
Yeah,
a little. Come on.
Well, I don't think he does. He's not a quarterback that needs to be rushing to be good. He doesn't need to rush. He's a great passer usually. So,
but Carson, that's part of his career history.
Lamar Jackson, week 1, had less than 20 rushing
Lamar.
yards and over 100 the next week. I'm not saying that's what Wilson's going to do, but it can be very situational, okay? So, if he's wanting to cook with his receivers,
why do you think
he's not doing it yet, but if that's the goal, he's not going to just take off and run as much. I would not say after 2 weeks that he's potentially the wrong guy.
Against
I couldn't make that judgment.
Poverty teams?
I think Houston, I think there's a real narrative that Houston is secretly amazing, but they've just upset these two.
Okay. Take off the tinfoil hat. Relax.
No, I'm kidding with that, but I think that it's been weird at Seattle. It's a weird vengeance game with how he left, and then the next week is a gross win, but they won. So no, I wouldn't make that claim on Russell yet. Fantasy wise, though, I'm a little disappointed if you took him as your QB1.
Fantasy wise, you're disappointed, but not real NFL. That makes no sense.
I'm just saying because
this guy,
you have probably started him those 2 weeks, and that's disappointing. Now to say that the next 7 years I have no faith in him doing anything for this team, yes, that is slightly different. That is slightly different.
I think Denver's disappointed they started in the last 2 weeks. That's what I think.
I think that he had over 300 passing yards in week 1. Again, only 1 passing touchdown. Still has more passing touchdowns on the season than Jalen Hurts, might I add. But I think 2 weeks and panicking. It seems like Nathaniel Hackett is a fraud, so I'll give you that much. But I wouldn't panic on Russell Wilson quite yet.
Yeah, but where's the rushing yards? That's my question. This team doesn't have the pass catchers to warrant Russell Wilson being a statue in the pocket. 5 total rushing yards over 2 games is unacceptable.
We need to just move on, but
I agree.
We'll see what happens.
But we'll see what happens. Jerry Jeudy considered day-to-day with his chest/sternum injury. Monitor his status. And then Cortland Sutton, he definitely picked up the slack, got you 19.7 fantasy points on 11 targets, had 122 yards, 7 catches. That's all good and nice. Here's one for the boys back home. Tyree Cleveland. Tyree Cleveland was the only other pass catcher on the team to have more than 1 catch.
I still got that down. That's all I know.
Oh my god, this is a sorry franchise. I'm telling you right now, man. Okay, let's pick this game.
Broncos.
You're picking the Broncos.
Broncos.
I'm picking the 49ers.
Broncos.
Okay, just let's
Maybe
move
I am
on.
a fan because of the way I'm talking.
You're delusional by the way you're talking.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go. Cowboys Giants is a Monday Night Football matchup. This again is another snooze fest in my opinion.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll prove us wrong, but let's go ahead and talk about the Cowboys. First guy I want to mention. Well, let's go ahead and get him out of the way because we've talked about him inadvertently. On
I didn't even know he got injured before we recorded this.
Dalton Schultz. He has a PCL strain in his knee. It is the same injury that Zeke Elliott was playing through last year. So if that gives you any context to how that can affect him season long.
Oh, I didn't know.
If he takes the time off that it requires for him to recover, it's multiple weeks. Will that happen? I don't know. But I say plan for Schultz to not be available. Even if he plays, he got 1.8 fantasy points last week, 4 targets, 2 catches, 18 yards. We miss Dak if you roster Dalton Schultz. I'll just say this. I think make other plans for your tight end this week if you roster Dalton Schultz. I have. So, of course, that's why I'm advocating for that. I wouldn't do something on one side and then advocate for the opposite for you. And then Noah Brown, this is kind of a, consideration waiver ad. He did get 20.1 fantasy points, 5 for 5, 91 yards, a touchdown. He's had 5 catches in consecutive weeks. This is one of these guys that has been in the league for a surprising amount of time, despite not really hearing his name called out that much. So someone to consider there for waivers. But I'm concerned that he has made less of an impact than Greg Dortch. But it's kind of a similar question. What happens to Noah Brown once Michael Gallup is healthy, which could be as soon as this week?
I would... it's similar analysis. It's hard to say, but I think Michael Gallup even more has a more established role in this offense.
Most definitely.
So I would be more worried about Noah Brown. That's really all I have to say about that. But one thing I want to say is, going into the season, I never would have thought 3 weeks in we'd be talking about Greg Dortch, Noah Brown, and then Richie James on the Giants. So, it's almost like I didn't research any players. No, they just weren't talked about.
Right. No, this is an interesting development. We will go ahead and switch over to the Giants now. So, since you mentioned him, let's talk about Richie James. 10.1 fantasy points. He had 5 catches on 6 targets, 51 yards. I consider him a sneaky pickup in deeper leagues. This is a guy that spent the previous 4 seasons just kind of existing on the San Francisco bench. Really nothing to speak for. The thing about it is that I'm reading reports saying that Kenny Golladay is unlikely to get much playing time. He only got 2 snaps this past week. And they're basically of the mind, the head coach and the GM, I want to say, that, you know what, despite the fact that Kenny Golladay is getting paid a ton of money, that doesn't mean we're going to force ourselves into playing him.
Yeah.
So that is a very interesting development for that. In addition to that, Kadarius Toney, I think he's probably droppable. He got another 2-touch game, not touchdown, touch game, and
he had 2 catches for 0 yards. Droppable. What do you do? Just dance at the line of scrimmage?
It was 1 for a loss and then 1 to recoup. So, yeah, it's the guys, the usual suspects we thought from this Giants pass catching regime are not showing up. Instead, we're talking about Richie James and then a more familiar face, Sterling Shepard, who got 9.4 fantasy points, 10 targets, which you like to see, 6 catches for 34 yards. Not the best, but I like Shepard as a waiver ad this week. He's shown to be effective when healthy. It's really just a matter of staying healthy, and it really feels like, of any team in the NFL, that the Giants have the most open wide receiver room. Anyone could take the top role.
I mean, and not that I'm lunging to get Shepard on my team, but the fact that he's a known name that got 10 targets seems like he has a pretty good chance of staying involved on this offense.
So I'm gonna wait to see who you pick in this one.
Hey, I don't like that. I honestly don't.
Hey, that's the advantage of being behind. I gotta be able to have some kind of way to get back at this. So looks like you're leaning towards the Cowboys.
I think I am. I'm trying to. Yeah, I am going to pick them. Although this is a gross matchup.
It is. I'll be looking forward to it on Monday night. I'm taking the Giants at home to start 3-0 in probably the first time in like 40 years. I don't know, but just we'll see. That's a stat I completely pulled out of the air, but there's no possible way that's true. But I'm picking the Giants to win this one, and let's go ahead and wrap up here.
Yeah, we got a little long-winded with this one, but a lot to analyze. A lot of completely random players that are relevant, so that
a lot of nonsense, a lot of good analysis. It was a good episode all around. Let's go ahead and wrap this one up here. Thank you all so much for watching. Hopefully you do well in your week 3 matchups, and we will see you again soon.
FFB country. That's rad.